What are somatic exercises and why are they important to you? What are some ways that you can benefit from self-care and why might it be important to care for both our minds and bodies? Join us today while we spend time with therapist Tabi Westbrooke as she explains these things and more.
Welcome to the Jesus People Sisterhood podcast, a place where Christian single women aged 50 plus connect. I am your host, Janine Jordan, a Christian confidence coach and leadership mentor in Alberta, Canada.
And I'm your co-host, Ellie McCormick, a Christian longevity coach and mentor in the USA. Being single women over 50, we know what it's like to feel overlooked, to have unrealized dreams, to experience the challenges of singlehood, and to be concerned about what our future will look like. We couldn't find anything online for single Christian women over 50, so we created Jesus People Sisterhood just for you, a place where sisters encourage and empower one another through the last third of life, because you are a treasure trove of wisdom and of exceedingly great value. This is an authentic community, a supportive family, with other women on the same journey where Jesus is the center of it all. Here you will find real talk, real community, and real sisters.
Join us as we discuss building relationships, whole health, and growing spiritually. We'll review helpful books and articles, chat with guest speakers, share success stories, and have some laughs along the way. So grab your favorite beverage and we'll get started.
Welcome, sisters, to this episode of the Jesus People Sisterhood podcast, the only podcast specifically for single Christian women over 50. Today, we give a shout out to our sisters in Virginia. Thank you for listening. Our guest today is Tabi Westbrooke, who will be sharing information on somatic exercises, self-care, and the importance of listening to our bodies. Tabi is a returning guest to our podcast, and you can listen to her previous interview on abuse and CPTSD in episodes 18 and 19. You might also want to listen to episodes 8 and 9 on trauma.
Tabi Westbrooke is a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed professional counselor, and licensed clinical mental health counselor. She's the founder and CEO of a counseling clinic with offices in Texas and North Carolina. Most importantly, she's an expert in and national speaker on abuse and how it harms women and how they can heal. Ellie and I want to let you know that in our interview with Tabi, yoga is mentioned in passing. We do not encourage anyone to practice yoga. Although we do know Christians who do, we personally feel that it can be a tool of the enemy. Since this is the second time that a guest has mentioned yoga, we just wanted to make our view clear. And now, our interview with Tabi Westbrooke. Well, welcome back, Tabi. Please tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
I'm so glad to be here. You guys are wonderful. And it is so exciting to be back and to be able to talk to you and to your audience about what I hope are good things. I am a licensed counselor. I specialize in trauma, especially complex trauma, with a subspecialization in domestic abuse and coercive control in the church, which is something that I think, we need to talk more about as a society and as a body of Christ. And so I am very passionate about women being healed and whole and healthy and all that God created them to be.
Love that.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen. So we're digging in today on somatic exercises and self-care and why our bodies matter. So Tabi, why should we care about our bodies?
Well, we were made embodied. And so I think that it's one of the things, particularly in Christian circles, that I think gets talked about in weird ways, sometimes if it's talked about at all. We talk about our soul and we talk about our hearts being for the Lord and setting our mind on things above. We tend to divorce that idea from our bodies, except our brain, the last time I checked, is part of my actual body, right? It is literally inside my skull. And my body has all of the neurochemicals that fuel the emotions and sensations and all of that stuff. And God created us that way. And when we ignore our bodies and don't notice them or listen to the information that they're giving us, we miss vital things. And that is not a good place to be. So, our bodies also are what carry us through this time and space that we live in, right? Our time on this earth is in a body. And so we can't just say they don't matter, and we also can't say they matter in the wrong ways, right? Because as women especially, our bodies get critiqued. There are all kinds of Instagram things. And I mean, we're getting ready as New Year's start as they will. And there's going to be all kinds of information on what your body should look like, feel like, sound like, do all of these things. And there's so many messages that are just antithetical to what God says about our bodies. And it also tends to pigeonhole bodies into one type. And that's not God. God created us with lots of flavor, I will say. And so honoring the particular flavor or challenge of our bodies is really important to do. So there's so much said and so much implicitly that we drink in, that really starting to get to know our bodies and be paying attention to them and marveling in the goodness that God has created in them is such an important place to be.
Okay. So how do we connect to our bodies?
Well, the first thing is noticing you have one. And particularly if you've had any traumatic experiences, you may have completely tried to cut your brain off from the rest of you. I always tell people we are not heads on a stick. That would be awfully weird and super creepy. But but we are whole embodied creatures. So one of the ways that we can start to connect is just by noticing and noticing little things. And that is something as simple as noticing, for example, as we're talking here, I'm sitting in a chair. You can't see that because all you can do is hear me. But sitting in a chair, I can notice that my feet are on the floor. I can notice whether or not my arms or legs are crossed. And I can be curious about my posture, right? So if I notice that I am like a giant human pretzel, I can get curious about that. Why do I feel the need to kind of pretzel up is what I tell my clients when I see them kind of do the pretzel thing. What's happening that is making you want to pretzel? Do you feel more comfortable that way? Is there some sort of protective feeling that it gives you? Are you trying to self-protect in some way? So maybe someone said something hard to you, or you read a sad story and noticed that your body was drawing in. And those are good places to just go, I wonder what that's about. And to be curious. And sometimes emotions will come up when you start to get curious. And that's when people start to panic, like, oh no, this feels uncomfortable. And I would invite you to be curious about that. First of all, there's nothing wrong. You're not doing something wrong if you start to feel something. I've worked with lots of ladies who enjoy yoga, and they have told me time and again that sometimes in certain postures or stretches that they will start to cry. And they're like, I don't know what happened. I'm like, well, your body is just trying to share something with you. So maybe it is a tender area that is, and it's not like because they're in pain that they're crying, it's just the emotions welled up. But maybe it was a tender area. A lot of women who have had sexual harm will notice that when they're doing hip work. So if they're doing things that open up their hips or stretch their hips, they'll notice a flood of emotion sometimes. And that's really normal to have happen. But if you don't know that, you freak out because of course you would. You'd be like, what is happening? And so it's just a good thing to know that like anything that comes up is just information. And it's just something to be curious about. And if it's really uncomfortable, then you can absolutely talk with a life coach or a therapist and kind of maybe work through it a bit. But to know that our bodies say so much, right? So if I were to put my hand on a stove and it was on, I'm going to hurt. I'm going to be like, oh my goodness. And it's going to cause my body to physically do something. So I'm going to register pain in my brain and I'm going to pull that hand away really, really fast. And I'm going to go, oh, what happened? Right. And I'm going to go, oh, well, I don't touch a hot stove anymore. And so that is very similar to anything else that we check in with our bodies about. So getting still, noticing any sensations that come up, noticing just our body position and being curious is a really great way to just kind of get that ball rolling.
So, like, if you're in that moment, you have these memories and things that come up that you weren't expecting. I mean, what do you do then?
Take a couple deep breaths, first of all. And don't panic, which I know that's like, I just said that and everybody's like, right, of course we're going to panic. So when you realize you're panicking, notice that you're panicking. And then also give yourself a ton of grace, right? When we get quiet, especially if we have been very good at ignoring what our body is telling us, and we start to say, hey, I'm curious now, our bodies are going to be like, yay, so excited. Let's have a chat. And that can be a little bit overwhelming. Now, if it's really overwhelming for you, if you're like, man, there's stuff coming up that I did not expect, then I would definitely encourage you to check in with your therapist and just let them know, or get a therapist if you don't have one, because there may be some things that you just need to process through, because that happens, especially if we have been historically good at just going, nope, 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 doesn't exist. Body what? Body who? No, no, thank you. And so I want to encourage folks that it sounds like so scary, and it's not always comfortable the first time it happens, but it's glorious because your bodies are so brilliant. Our bodies are so brilliant. I was talking to a friend this week who is going to go get surgery because they found some cancer in one of her breasts. And she knew something was off. She's like, something just doesn't feel right. They had done a biopsy and they were like, well, it's probably nothing. It's probably just fibrous, whatever. And she said, you know what? Go ahead and take it out. I just feel like that is the right thing. And they did. And when they did the full check, it was cancer. And she caught it super early because she trusted her gut. And as women, I think that we often have that vilified. But I'd also like to remember that we have the Holy Spirit indwelling in us. That is not metaphoric, right? God says, I will give you the helper, the counselor to come alongside you and instruct you in all things. I will make my dwelling place in you, right? And so, if we are indwelled by the Holy Spirit, this isn't outside of our physical realm. Jesus himself came in an actual body, right? And we're going to see when we are all resurrected with him, like the scars on his hands and in his side and on his feet. And those aren't going away. He kept them so that we will remember, right? And so, our bodies being made in the image and likeness of the living God tell us all sorts of stuff. And when we check in and slow down, it gives the Holy Spirit time to talk with us, to use our bodies as information. And my friend is undergoing surgery now to make sure that there won't be any cancer in her breast. And it likely saved her life to just go, you know what, I'm going to trust my gut on that. And let's just check, right? Now, our gut's not perfect. We know that, right? We don't live and die by emotions, but we check in. And we don't live and die by body sensations, right? Like if I stub my toe, I should not Google. First of all, don't Google anything about your body, generally speaking, because then Dr. Google's always going to be like, you have cancer. And then you're going to be freaking out for no reason. So don't do that, but get good medical care. But if I stub my toe, like there's no big esoteric thing. There's like, I should probably walk farther away from my bedpost, right? And so, but that could be information too. So it doesn't have to be some big, deep thing all the time, but it is so helpful. A lot of times my clients will say, man, I was standing near this person and they felt shady. Like my body felt skeevy is sometimes the word I get.
I've
The
had
younger
that.
folks, yeah, the younger folks would be like, it's sus, and so like they're putting out, what is it? One of my Gen Z clients said to me, they're putting out some red flag vibes. And I'm like all for noticing the red flags for sure. And so, like, but our bodies register that, right? Our palms might begin to sweat, our hearts might begin to race, our breathing may increase, right? And so, what we say in that shorthand of it's a vibe or someone feels skeevy is really our body saying something isn't right here and you should move yourself away.
Just to back up, I don't know if we talked about this last time you were here, how people who have trauma or whatever, and then go to a therapist and they talk about it. But sometimes that's not enough because your body keeps score of, unbeknownst to your mind, of this trauma. And so they have these somatic therapies that people do, some people do, that,
More people should do.
yeah, I haven't done that, but I think I would like to because I think I do have things that are stored not in my mind. There's a lot of healing in my mind, but in my body. So one, could you explain some of those therapies? And then two, if we're not planning to go to the therapist, but something we could do ourselves at home, if we're noticing like this instance where, wow, you're starting to have these feelings, you're taking note of what your body's doing and you realize there's something there.
Absolutely. So when we talk about somatic therapy, soma literally means body. That is the word for body. And so really it's just a body-based therapy, which means that in addition to what you believe and what you think and all of the things that we think of as mind or talk therapy, we also incorporate the body. And so with my clients, I often ask, where do you feel that in your body? So I was talking with a client just yesterday as I was kind of finishing up for the week and said, I noticed that they felt like they were a little wiggly in their seat and, across from me. And I said, what's happening in your body right now? They said, oh, I just feel really tight. I said, oh, can you tell me where? And they're like, oh man, my chest and shoulders just feel heavy and tight. And so I said, well, let's be curious and let's notice that. And we had just been talking about something, some deep work, some hard things. And their body was saying, oh man, we feel it. And so we were able to notice that. And I asked, what thoughts and emotions were coming up for my client, and they were able to tell me. And we were able to process through it. So if you think of it kind of as digestion, right? Like we eat food, it goes into our stomach, it does whatever it does in there, goes to the intestines, all the good stuff comes into our bodies and all the bad stuff leaves, right? And so it's that process of noticing it, letting it work through, and then the junk exits and the good stuff stays. It's not uncommon when I'm walking with someone through something very traumatic that they will actually shake or get hot or cold as we're doing it because their body is responding to that being moved through. And it is a deeper level of healing than just talking about it because our bodies remember, right? And our bodies have a lot of implicit memory. So explicit memory is I went to the store yesterday morning at 9 a.m. I walked in. I remember picking up a can of coffee and walking to the checkout and checking out. That's explicit memory. I can tell you the details of it. Implicit memory is I was standing in a coffee aisle and something felt off. And I couldn't quite figure it out, but it didn't feel good. So I was supposed to get a couple other things, but I just checked out with the coffee. Right. So there's something that my body knows in that moment that is implicit, doesn't have the explicit memory. So if you have developmental trauma, which is stuff that happens when you're a kid, then you may have some implicit memories, things your body can feel or know that your brain doesn't quite get yet. And because God is so kind and brilliant, and He knows that this world is so hard, if your developmental trauma or any big trauma was really awful, you may not remember parts of it. So if a client comes in and I say, tell me a little bit about your childhood, like what was it like growing up? And they're like, I don't remember. It's a black hole. I'm like, ding, 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 ding. We have trauma because our brains shut down what we can't figure out and what we can't make sense of. And as kids, right, so little autonomy. And so there's all kinds of stuff trapped in our bodies and things that we may do or not do. So, for example, if you have had sexual harm, now you're with a loving, wonderful partner, and they touch you in a certain way that is loving and kind and not harmful, but your body goes, oh, no, thank you. Then that is an implicit memory of something that happened. So I am a sexual assault survivor. I will just say that. And if I go to a male chiropractor, they can't adjust my hips because my body will register it as pain and I will, without even thinking, get up off that table and move. Like I just can't do it. And it's not because they've done anything wrong. It's because harm was done and it's still locked in my body in some ways. So I choose to go to a female chiropractor, which then works for me because I don't have that same physical reaction. And so it's not that I'm not healed. It's not that I haven't worked through some of that in therapy. It's that my body says, look, we're going to make sure you're protected. Right. And so my body's just trying to protect me, even though there's not a real threat there, because there has been a real threat in the past that it remembers. And you can work through some of those things. Now I could do some additional work around it and, find a really safe chiropractor who's trauma informed and work up to being able to be touched in that way without like losing my tacos. But also I can pick a female chiropractor, right? Like know the battles you need to fight. Sometimes that isn't it. Those are things that when we know, then I can either address it head on if that's necessary, or I can address it in a different way, like going to a different gender chiropractor.
Right. I've had something like that happen. I remember, and it wasn't male or female, it was just, it was a bunch of friends of us were at church, and I think it was after church. Somebody's daughter had been learning massage or something, and she was massaging my friend's neck, and my friend said, "Oh, why don't you do Ellie?" And I'm like, didn't want it. And then she started, and I'm like, so tense the whole time and just wishing she would stop. I realize it's just because it's like being touched and it being expected to relax. I like couldn't do it. And it wasn't my mind. Again, it was my body reacting to like, I cannot handle this. Please stop touching me.
Yeah. And our bodies are so kind, right? They are going to act to protect us like way before our brain. And if we think about the fight, flight, freeze, flop response, which is what happens when we are, activated in a, potentially dangerous situation, or one that feels dangerous, even if it's not actually, like if there were a bear in here, my body is going to register the beginning of action before my mind does. Right. So if I look over and I go, oh, there's a bear and I don't care, I'm going to be lunch. Like, let's just be honest, it's going to go bad. Right. But my body's going to go, because it's going to act to protect me so much faster. Like by the time I go, it's a bear, my body's already taking action. My neurochemicals have already changed. My ability to move my body has already changed, whether it's to run, fight, fall over, whatever that is. My body has already had a physiological response before my brain goes, that's a bear. And that's amazing. Like if you've ever been driving also, and let's say a deer runs out in front of you, which that's never a fun experience, and you realize that you have moved your vehicle before your brain registered that's a deer, that is because your body instantaneously like took action for you. And it's not different in traumatic experiences. Our bodies are constantly acting to protect us because God made us that way. And so if you've been through some serious harm, then you walk down the street and see somebody that maybe looks like the person that harmed you, or you're in an area that feels suddenly familiar but not good, then that's your body going, hey, we're waking up here. We're on alert. What's going on? What's going on? There was this one place I'd had a really bad experience as a teenager, and the area had been built up, and so it wasn't super the same in a lot of ways. But my body, like I was sitting at this intersection, I was like, why am I like practically having a panic attack? What is happening here? And I was like, where am I? And I realized I'm at this intersection right by where I was harmed. And
Mhm.
even though it had been slightly altered due to construction, my body knew where I was. And I was like, well, that's interesting data. And so I had done enough work at that point in my life to go, okay, I can be curious. I can be thankful. I can breathe through this, know that I am safe now, right? So that's some of the ways to kind of help us come back into ourselves when our bodies are like, because our bodies, if we're having just that response, that visceral response, our brains aren't going like our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinky part of our brain, and our language part is not online with us. And so what we want to do is be able to bring that online and look at the situation a little differently. So at that intersection, I was able to take a couple breaths once I was like, what is going on? And say, okay, this is what's going on. I am safe. There's no one here to harm me at this time. I am sitting in my own car at this intersection. I am years removed from the situation and I am safe now. And I was able to breathe into that and my body kind of calmed down. And, and I thanked my body. And I know like it sounds a little weird and woo woo to talk to yourself like that. I just call it my internal staff meeting. But sometimes I will say to my body, thank you so much for being awake for me, for noticing things that my brain hasn't caught up yet. And I am so thankful for that. And that also because like the adage that we use as therapists is what we resist persists. So if I'm like, it's not happening, it's not happening. So if I tell you guys, don't think about kittens, don't think about kittens, little cute kittens with little fuzzy faces. What are we all thinking about now? Kittens. We are absolutely thinking about kittens. You're welcome for that, by the way, because kittens are adorable. But if I say I'm not feeling sad, I'm not feeling anxious, I'm not feeling this, my body's not doing this, what are we doing? Right? But if I say, hey, I'm curious. You know what, body? Thank you so much for being activated so that I know that there's something here that I either need to process or just to be noticing or what have you. So when I was in my vehicle saying, thank you, body, for noticing that we were in a place that was familiar and being ready to protect me, but I'm okay now.
Mm.
So I was thinking you talked about talking to yourself and you talked about breathing. And I've heard people tap themselves or something.
Yes.
Is there something to that? I mean, it sounds a little woo-hoo. It
It
does,
does.
so
Yeah. So so tapping is awesome. I mean, obviously I'm very excitable about these things. I'll just own that. If you think about it, so every time someone says like EMDR or somatic experiencing or tapping is woo woo, I'm like, no, it's neuroscience by the God that created us, honestly, because he's brilliant. I mean, we are talking about a God that developed fish that live deep in the ocean that have a headlight on their forehead, right? You know, those little ugly fish with the lantern, right? Like, if God could come up with that, and who knows what else is in the deep sea, I'm not entirely sure I want to know if I'm being honest, but like, then how creative is he with our bodies? Right, that are made in the image and likeness of him. Tapping helps our bodies know we are safe. And there are particular tapping things, and I can have a link so you can put it in the show note where you can go to some different places and look at some tapping ideas and places to tap. And so you can tap your forehead. And again, you're not smacking yourself. It's a gentle tap. Let me just put that out there because sometimes people can be a little rough when they're real distressed. Don't do that. But you can tap yourself gently, like on your forehead and under your eyes, or on they call it kind of the karate chop on the side of your hand. You can do all of those things, and it starts to help your nervous system regulate. So a lot of somatic things are part of what is called polyvagal theory. Your vagus nerve is a ginormous nerve. It's one of the biggest ones in the body, one of the longest, that runs basically down your spine and like around your body in a lot of ways. So there's actually the terminus to the vagus nerve is in your face. So you take your hands and put them on your cheeks gently, again, gentle touches, people, that you might notice that you feel held and calm and cared for. It may even bring up tears because it's a comforting pose. It's one of the somatic holds, if you will, that I do with clients. And so there are several different things that you can do. And what we're doing is we're just waking up the parts of the body that God gave us that help us become calmer and reminding ourselves that we're safe. Now, we don't want to do that if we aren't safe. We want to honor that in our bodies and move, leave, go somewhere else, right? Like do something different so that we're not in an unsafe situation. So Hillary McBride wrote the book, The Wisdom of Our Bodies, and it's very much in this vein. And so when we learn to trust the wisdom of our bodies that God has given it, then we can know when to say, yes, I need to take this action, or what, no, I don't need to take this action, or I need to do something else. Right. And that's a beautiful thing as we kind of learn to listen well.
For the sake of time, we're stopping this episode here. We'll pick up next week to hear the rest of our interview with Tabi Westbrooke on somatic exercises and self-care. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please share any thoughts that resonated with you from today's podcast episode in our private Facebook group at Jesus People Sisterhood Community. Start reaching out to other single women and create your local group of Jesus People Sisters. Please let us know about your group to add to our directory by contacting us at support@JesusPeopleSisterhood.com.
Have you had a good experience with a business? They've treated you honestly and helped you at a reasonable price? Please let us know. We would like to start a directory of JPS-friendly businesses. Let's care for one another.
Be blessed by Him who is able to protect you from stumbling and to make you stand in the presence of His glory, blameless and with great joy. Until next time. Hey sister, before you go, thank you for listening. If you found value in today's podcast, the best way to say thank you is by leaving a 5-star written review at Apple Podcasts. That raises us in the rankings and helps other sisters find us too. And please tell a friend or post it on your social media. If you're a single Christian woman over 50, this podcast was created specifically for you. The Jesus People Sisterhood is your community to find support and friendship with other sisters who can understand. Be sure to follow us on your podcast app and join our free private Facebook group at Jesus People Sisterhood Community.
Jesus People Sisterhood has also started a private Facebook group for housing and co-living opportunities. You can check that out at Jesus People Sisterhood Senior Housing. You can also find us on Facebook at Jesus People Sisterhood and individually for Janine at riseupcoachingandconsulting.com and for Ellie at samaramountain.com. And ladies, this is the necessary disclaimer. Our podcast content is for informational purposes and does not constitute professional advice from mental health, medical, legal, financial, or other areas. The opinions of the guest do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host. It is our heart that this podcast will be a blessing to you. Together, let's build a powerful sisterhood with Jesus. Make a friend, add a sister, across the border and around the world.